There's a pretty one, Ulysses. There it is.
Hello BookTube, I'm Shawn the Book Maniac. Welcome back to my channel. Here I am with another full review, this time of a novel that not only since I finished it in early June have I been calling my book of the year, but more than that, one of the very best novels I've read in my entire life. So, I've intimidated the crap out of myself, loving it as deeply as I do, and I typically don't even try to review books I love this much, but I'm going to try it this time because there aren't. The last time I checked, which was a few weeks ago, nobody else had done a full review of this novel, and I'm supposing you're wondering what the heck it is. It is a novel translated from the Swedish, Collected Works by Lydia Sandgren, translated from the Swedish by Agnes Broomé, published, I believe, in English in January of 2023. And I think the way into my review is to tell you a little bit, especially if you don't know me or my channel very well, what kind of a reader I am. It may make a difference to how you interpret and process the rest of my review. I am a slow reader. I read this over, I believe, 6 weeks as a buddy read with my dear friend Joe Smith, everybody's favorite commenter and buddy reader on BookTube. And I think we both kind of wish we'd taken 12 weeks to read it. It's a chunky book, just under 600 pages in this edition. We were a little nervous when we saw how small the print was, but the small print didn't cause us any problems, and what I can say is that one of the first things that Joe and I agreed on about this novel was that at around the page 100 mark, we were starting to dread it ever ending. Another thing to know about me is that I'm a Google reader. This novel immersed me in Swedish culture, which is not a culture I know well, and a lot of Swedish names of buildings and artists and authors and cities, most of which I Googled, and that enhanced my reading of the text. If you're not familiar with Sweden, and you don't deal well with a bunch of foreign expressions, I don't mean dialogue, but I mean, names of buildings and what does that mean in English, or who is this artist or this author? If that doesn't float your boat, you're not probably going to get along with this book for that reason. For this particular reader, that was something that I absolutely loved. Maybe the final thing that I will share about myself as a reader is that I'm much more of a character-driven reader than I am plot-centered. And this book satisfied me incredibly deeply while also providing a really propulsive plot. I think if you are completely a plot reader and you are not a slow reader, this book may not be for you. But if you are at least one of those two things, somebody who appreciates a character-driven novel, and or you like to read your books slowly and not rush through them to find out what happens, I think if you're the kind of reader that just wants to get to the end because you want to know what happened, because there is a lot of mystery in this novel, I don't think it's going to work. But I'm not you, so there's my cards on the table. Now let me tell you about the book. I thought I was going to try to hold it up for the whole review, but I can't. It's heavy and I'm old, so I'll put up a computer GIF. It's set in the second biggest city, I believe, in Sweden, Gothenburg, a city I'd never heard of until I read this novel. And the main characters are Martin, his wife Cecilia, their daughter Rakel, I've just learned how to pronounce that in Swedish, Rakel, and Martin's best friend Gustav. Gustav and Martin and Cecilia came of age in Sweden in the 70s, and maybe into the 80s. So it's very much a coming-of-age novel, that first part of the story that is interwoven with the more present-day narrative. And the relationship between the three of them ends up being the core of the novel, the core of how the plot unfolds, and their impact on one another's character is pretty darned central and pretty darn mysterious. There will be no spoilers in this review, and it is definitely not a spoiler to say that Martin and Cecilia get married. It seems to be a really great companionate marriage with lots of great sex and intellectual compatibility. And when their second child, Ellis, who is not a major character in the novel, but when the second child, the boy, is just been weaned off the breast, basically, Cecilia finishes her PhD, walks out of the house, and they never hear from her again. And that was 15 years ago in terms of the present day, which is set closer somewhere in the 21st century. I'm not good with dates or identifying time periods when I'm reading because don't really care about that kind of stuff. But very early on, that gets the reader's attention. Where is Cecilia? What happened to Cecilia? Why are all these other characters seemingly kind of blasé about the fact that there's this big hole in their lives? You quickly are disabused of the notion that they're blasé, but what most of the characters struggle with is something that you and I struggle with. I'm going to hazard a guess that I can make that assumption about you. And that's the mundanity of what am I going to do to fill the next hour of my time? And that there's an existential anxiety that can creep up in the most banal of moments. What am I going to do from now until the movie starts? What am I going to do until I fall asleep? It's 2 a.m. Am I going to fall asleep? The reader is brought right into the heart of so many mundane moments like that you can't help but wonder if that's one of the themes of the novel, and I think it very much is. How do we inhabit ourselves, or what do we do when we don't inhabit ourselves, and how do we make it to dinner time without falling into the abyss within? And that was such a rich part of the novel that there's all this mystery about the disappeared mother and where did she go, and there's so much highbrow stuff that I loved about art and literature and writing and the creative process and publishing and translation, which I'm going to talk a little bit more about in a minute. And there's all this everyday, ordinary frittering away of time and inanely planning to do things that you've been inanely planning to do that might give your life some meaning and not doing it. And that's another way to fill up the quotidian. That was a powerful part that I think a fast read would skim over. Lest I come across as if I'm telling you how to read the book, I'm going to stop telling you how to read the book. Just focus on how I read the book. I'm not going to say very much more about the plot or the characters, but Cecilia was an incredibly talented, gifted woman. She made art. Where is her art? Why does nobody have her art in the walls? Everybody talks about Cecilia's art. Where the hell is it? She disappeared 15 years ago, but where did her paintings disappear? Why aren't there any on the walls in the home of her husband and children? She was also a brilliant academic with several published books to her name, and then she disappeared. Why would she run off and hide away so well that she couldn't continue her academic career? What was going on for Cecilia? Martin had aspirations to write, and interleaved between many of the chapters are excerpts from an interview with him, questions and answers. And the interview questions are all about his writing life. And yet you're reading the rest of the story and it's like, well, where are his books? There was that one story in an anthology. What the hell? And then there's Martin's childhood best friend, who's best friend since childhood, Gustav, who did actually realize an artistic life and became, in the fictional world of the novel, one of Sweden's most famous artists, painters. And why are most of his... Editing Shawn here, I've decided to finish the end of this sentence in a way that will leave more of the story for you to discover. Why are most of his paintings about one other character in the novel? What's going on with that? That's all I'm going to say about that. Meanwhile, all of these really intelligent, relatably screwed up people have their intellectual and artistic passions. Martin is obsessed with, I believe, an American writer, I think it's American, who doesn't exist in real life, that he is endlessly, for years, making notes towards writing a biography of him. That biography is still in process. This novel is jam-packed full of references to really exciting Swedish artists that if you Google them and fall into the pictures, it makes you fall into the novel more. So there's all that stuff going on as well that was just stimulating, even up higher than my nipples. So I'm getting all worked up. I'm getting into a tizzy, getting all excited about this novel all over again. Two more things. I can't believe this is a debut novel. It is a crime against literature that this not only was not nominated for the Booker International Prize this year, but it didn't win. It's an outstanding work of literary fiction. I said a couple more things. It's probably going to be 3 more things. It's a strange title for a novel. Hey, collected works, what the heck? When you find out about 4/5 of the way through the novel, come and talk to me and see if you need a hug as badly as I did when I got to that part in the novel. And the last comment I'm going to make is that what makes the novel work so masterfully is the precise use of point of view. This story is only shown through a couple points of view, which makes us wonder about the other characters and wonder what fast one is being pulled on us. And by the end, I was gobsmacked with how lovingly the narrative withheld things from me, even after I'd gotten to the final page. If you're the kind of a reader that wants every little thing tied up at the end, this probably isn't a book for you. But, oh my God, it's now the end of August, so many weeks have passed since I put the book down, and I feel like I'm still reading it. And in fact, I think I am going to reread it with Joe this fall. And now I'm just going to read you a short excerpt from the opening chapter. It's not right at the beginning. It's actually chapter 3 in the first section, but it's on page 16. There are no spoilers here. And this is a scene with Martin. He's about 50, and his daughter, Rachel, is a university student. So however old that would be. Cecilia disappeared 15 years ago. If there's anybody else I need to explain, I'll just do it briefly as I'm reading it, but it's a short section. When he got home, Martin found his daughter in the kitchen. With her elbows on the table and her chin in her hand, Rachel was bent over a book, so absorbed she didn't notice him. Cecilia had been exactly like that too. It was like they flipped a switch, heard nothing, saw nothing. There was no knowing what was going on inside. When Rachel was little, he'd had to say her name again and again, and when his voice got loud enough to prompt a reaction, she had glared at him and slunk away to do whatever she'd been asked to do, pick up her toys, make her bed. Now she gave a start and offered to help with dinner. "That's okay," he said. "What are you reading? Freud? Beyond the Pleasure Principle. My goodness, for university, I'm hoping." She pushed the book away but left it open. "Is that a skeptical tone I detect?" "Not at all," he said, and dumped potatoes into the sink. But he had to admit it. He'd been surprised, not to say leery, when Rachel had insisted on studying psychology a year or 2 ago. The program itself wasn't the problem. He'd been told it was as difficult to get into as law or medical school. It was the fact that she wouldn't be using her obvious talent for texts and languages. All that time she'd spent learning German, and what was she doing with it? Reading some old head-shrinkers' theories about the sexual urges of humankind? Martin had thought her year in Berlin would nudge her in a more literary and publishing-related direction. He could probably have got her an internship with Ulrich at Schmidt Verlag if she absolutely had to go off to Germany. But even though she almost never turned down the occasional reader's report, that was the full extent of Rochel's interest in Berg and Andren. Berg and Andren is the name of the publishing company that Martin runs. Imagine if he had had her opportunities at the age of 24. If Abbe, that's Martin's father, if Abbe had been a publisher instead of a former sailor, and if he, Martin, had been able to step right into a world of literature and education. "Why are you looking so unhappy?" "There are a lot of green potatoes in here." "Hey, actually, I have something for you." He wiped his hands and went to fetch the German novel. "I'm wondering whether this is something we'd want to translate. Why don't you have a read and let me know what you think?" "I don't know if I have the time," she said, her eyes on the blurb. "There's no rush." That wasn't entirely true. Knowing Ulrich Ackermann, she would start badgering him about it relatively soon. She needed to know if they were interested or not. "I have a lot going on at uni right now. I'm supposed to write an essay about that." She nodded at Freud. Martin watched her hands as she flipped through the pages. Thin hands with long fingers, just like Cecilia's. Other than the hands, though, she looked more like him. "Beyond the Pleasure Principle," he scoffed. "What is there really beyond the pleasure principle? Humankind's relentless journey towards death and dissolution, it would seem." "Cheery." Hey, would you mind checking if we have any cream? That gives you a little taste of the writing, gives you a taste of the domesticity that grounds the narrative and prevents it from floating away in all this intellectual and artistic context. Gives you a little peek at the relationship between mother and daughter, the absence of Cecilia, and introduces one thing that I'm not going to even identify in that passage that is going to end up becoming extremely important as you fall further into the novel. The first time I heard the French word manquer was in fact, I think it's the only time that I heard the word manquer, was in Julia Cameron's self-helpy creativity book, The Artist's Way. She talked about the artist manqué, which is the artist that is left unfulfilled, that doesn't realize the potential they have, that doesn't actually go on to make art, but instead remains repressed and stifled. That word does not occur in this book, but that is a really important concept that this book dramatizes in a way that made me gasp, made me reflect on my own fool self, and made my buddy reader, Jo, when she got to the last page, hug the book. I wish something akin for you when you try it, because you know you must. Thanks for watching.